Hey guys, the Uber Theologian here, coming back at you. I've changed call signs from the Camaro Theologian to the Uber Theologian. As I deliver food, I talk theology. And it doesn't mean I work for Uber, it just means I'm an awesome theologian. Let me get that straight. Any legal issues out of the way. Okay, now, of course, I wrote the blog on Molinism. So many of you guys have asked for the last 10 years, where I stand on Molinism. And normally I give a pretty quick, simplistic answer. And, I thought I would try to dig a little bit deeper into it and understanding where everybody's at, because so many people are Molinists today, or at least so many people who really love to do theology. I'm not saying it's an easy view to adopt in general in a passive way. I don't think it will ever become really that popular because it's so convoluted. It doesn't necessarily make it wrong, but it does have some points against it, at least to me. Now, in the blog, I explained something. I used an illustration. I'm going to use that illustration again in just a moment. But I think it's very, very important when we're talking about Molinism to see the two things it's trying to preserve: independent or libertarian freedom. And what I mean by that is, when we make choices, the choices are real and they have their birth or their genesis in us, not in some other circumstances, not in any other prior conditions, preconditions, and not from God. So God, these are things that aren't outside of God's control. I mean, God could control them, but he allows us to make our own free decisions. And that's reasonable because we're created in God's image, and you know that God has libertarian freedom. Basically, libertarian freedom is the power of contrary choice. Whatever choice you make, you could have made otherwise. And that's why we are held guilty, held responsible for the choices we make. Now, I very much believe in responsibility, but more in a holding attention, and maybe I'll get to that in a minute, but I believe in a responsibility. But if you don't start with the libertarian freedom, it really does have a philosophical underpinning to everything. If you're assuming libertarian freedom, you could probably get to Molinism. The problem is, Molinism tries to marry libertarian freedom, that we are truly free in the sense of the power of contrary choice, and God's sovereignty. The world is exactly how God planned it to be. Everything happens according to his will, and he has decreed such. Even predestination, whenever you talk about people's being predestined to salvation, yes, God did predestine us. So how do you get these two? Because if everything's predestined, if everything's works according to God's decreative will, that he has decreed it to happen, that it's not just permitting it to happen, but he has decreed it, then how in the world do you and I, have freedom? Well, here's what the Molinist perspective, it presents itself as kind of this middle way between Calvinism and Arminianism, kind of a Calminian type view. And I guess in some ways you could say it is. I mean, it seems like you end in one direct camp or another, depending on what the emphasis is later on. But at the same time, I mean, there's a lot of people who see it as a valid option and have adopted it. William Lane Craig is one of them. Probably the bulwark, the philosophical underpinnings come so much from Alvin Plantinga. Plantinga is just a heavyweight out there whenever it comes to philosophy in the Christian world, and he's great. Both him and Craig, William Lane Craig, are great, but Craig has popularized it to a large degree. So these are kind of Craigites, and I'm a Craigite in a lot of ways. I love William Lane Craig. Guy's so smart, is crazy, he's so good on his feet. It's amazing. Just love the guy. Same team as him, just I differ whenever it comes to this kind of stuff. Now, how do you get free will, true freedom, and divine sovereignty, and marry them? Well, for the Molinist, what you do is you basically, let's go back before time, before anything ever began, and you have God being able to see in his omniscience. He knows everything, right? So, I mean, he knows everything, so he can tell you what would happen in every single circumstance, every possible world, as it's sometimes called. This is called middle knowledge. Middle knowledge exists prior to creation. He knows beforehand what everything, before his will. So he has all of these options because he knows every single situation, all of these universes, if you want to put it kind of in contemporary ways of thinking. There are multiple universes out there that could be, and God knows every single one of them. And this is very true. This is called counterfactuals. Counterfactuals, I believe in it as well. I mean, there does exist counterfactuals. The Bible says this very clearly whenever Christ says to Bethsaida, "Woe to you, Bethsaida, for if what is going on here with me present to you would have happened in Sodom and Gomorrah, they would have repented in sackcloth and ashes." I think that's in Matthew chapter 11. But that is a counterfactual. If it's a contingency, if something would have been different, then things would have turned out differently, and Jesus knows it. God knows all counterfactuals. He knows all options, how everything would be. Therefore, based upon this, and this is kind of the, I guess, ingenious for some people, based upon this, there are an infinite number of universes, if you will, or just ways that things would play out. God can choose from any one of them, and he chooses the universe that perfectly displays what his sovereign wills to happen. So therefore, you've got all the universes out there, and you've got these universes that have freedom. They exist prior to God's will. People are making choices in these. He's not determining it. It's something, again, happens prior to creation, prior to his will. Middle knowledge exists. And so he chooses from this plethora of options the one that goes along with his will. Everybody in one of these options has made a free will decision. You are the genesis of your own actions. So God preserves your freedom and allows and has his complete sovereignty that stays intact. Now, I mean, you do have the other options, like the Calvinistic option, which we object and say, wait a minute, God is sovereign, and that means that the universe he created, he brings it to be the way he wanted it to be, not from counterfactuals, but from his will. His will produces the reality. It doesn't look in and observe the realities. It creates the reality. Because how would all these other universes be created? Where would they come from? What's their genesis? And what is how? It just doesn't understand the existence of these universes. The big problem. Where did they come from? Now, here's what I did. I tried to give an illustration the best I could. I'm not a philosopher nor the son of a philosopher. I do love philosophy, but it's not my expertise. And we all should love philosophy. We all should study philosophy. We do the best we can because philosophy provides the waters in which we swim, do our theological swimming. It's a background for it all. So whenever you look at this philosophically and put it in an illustration, I tried to come up with something, and I came up with a library. No, an author and a library. So let's start with a Calvinist. The Calvinist, you have the author, and he has a library of only one book that he created, and that's the book that exists. So there's no other options. It's just one book. Everything that happens, it happens because he wrote it. Now, for Calvinists such as me, there's a mystery between true responsibility and how God is going to judge the world. I think we are truly responsible for our actions. I think it's a mystery. You put those two together and I can't reconcile them. Nobody can reconcile them. If you're a Calvinist, you shouldn't even try, because that's where we exist. We exist in mystery at this point, and we have biblical precedent for this because we believe that there are things that God has revealed and things that he has left mysterious. The secret things belong to the Lord, but the things revealed belong to us. So I just believe it's one of those secret things. I've tried to work it out, tried to hold integrity with my biblical understanding, philosophical understanding, and everything else, and I cannot reconcile them. Therefore, I do not reconcile them. I just simply say God wrote the book, but we are responsible characters within that book. There's only one book. Okay, now let's talk about the Arminian book. The Arminian library, this author, well, basically what happens is God wrote the end of the book and some key parts throughout the book, like the crucifixion, the resurrection, the interventions that God has in history. But for the most part, he allows the characters of the book to write it. I guess you could put this in a play, and in the play you just have the people acting on their own, coming up with situations, and the writer of the play just saying, here's how it has to end. You guys get there somehow. Or no, maybe he doesn't even have to tell them how it ends. It's just he knows how it's going to go, and it goes according to his will. But he backs off and he lets people do things. It's a permissive will, not a decreative will. Okay, so there's only one book in Calvinism and Arminianism. But here in Molinism, what you have is you have the introduction of this situation where there are an infinite number of books. Okay, before creation, you have an infinite number of books that God has to choose from, and God has a perfect will, a decreative will, a sovereign will, and he says, this is exactly how I want every moment to turn out. And then he finds that because in the plethora of infinity of options, there is finally going to be an option that does everything exactly the way he wanted. Now, here's the thing, okay? First of all, the question that I ask is, if this is prior to God's will, prior to creation, where did all these books come from? And you say, well, it's just from what God knows will happen. But do they exist? Does this exist independently of his will? Yes, it does. Molinist has to have it that way. Well, if it exists independently of his will, then where did they come from? You see, his will is what brings about his foreknowledge, not the other way around. So he knows what's going to happen because he knows what he's going to do. So here is you have an infinite number of books and you have no idea where they came from. And it's just like the exact same thing is going all the way back to the problem of libertarian freedom. If no prior conditions cause the action that I choose, no prior conditions, no outside forces determine. It's not determinative. If no prior actions are determinative on what I choose each day, how do I choose something? And in the end, it's got to be a self-determination, but there is no explanation for where that self-determination came from. Whenever I'm driving down the road and I am running by a restaurant and I turn in to pick up something, at McDonald's, I get a hamburger. Why did I get a hamburger? Because I like hamburgers. Why did I go to McDonald's? Because I like McDonald's, which I don't. I haven't gotten a McDonald's hamburger since I don't know how long. But anyway, so I've got a delivery coming in, so I've got to wrap this thing up. But we have a situation where I make a choice to get a hamburger, but nothing prior caused it. Not a personality issue because I didn't determine my personality. Not a prior issue in genetics. Not a prior issue in things that went before. I just can choose things, and I could have chosen the otherwise. And so therefore, where did that choice come from? And in the end, it has to be birthed out of nothing. It has to be ex nihilo, from nothing. That choice has to be from nothing, and if it's from nothing, it's completely arbitrary. That's the only place I can get. I would love to go in the direction of free will, but I cannot accept libertarian free will, because all it produces is an arbitrary choice, a flipping of the coin, if nothing prior causes that choice. So you have the situation where these books are made up of all these choices and all these universes. So where did the books come from? Well, they came from the same place that your libertarian freedom comes from. Whenever you make a choice, it comes ex nihilo, out of nothing. Now you have all this stuff just being produced before God produces it, out of nothing. Where did they come from? You cannot have that situation in my book. So that's why I reject Molinism. I mean, there's other reasons too, because it's just, I don't know, it's such a long way. The directions are so convoluted to get to a place that is where they're trying to get. And it's outside the Bible. These directions you have to find in other places. And I don't mind finding our understanding in philosophy and working things out the best we can, but whenever it gets that convoluted, there are problems there. So anyway, you guys have asked what I believe about Molinism. There's my current thoughts. I could be wrong, of course, as always. And while I am a Calvinist, I'm not a committed Calvinist. I'm a Calvinist just because I think it's the best option. And if I want to change, I'll change. No big deal. I love to go along with the truth. So anyway, guys, thank you so much. This is the Uber Theologian. And if you can support what I do, you can throw in a tip at my Patreon. There's a link to my Patreon and link to both of my websites with my blog. My Patreon has the blog on it, and also Credo courses down there is linked with all kinds of good theology, philosophy courses from the best teachers in the world. Once again, I reiterate, I do love William Lane Craig. This is not some challenge to him. The guy's a lot smarter than I am, but I do think he has to deal with this, and I don't think he has well in his responses. See ya.